What up, peeps? How y'all doing today? Well, I'm going to take a second run at this video here. Got like 3 minutes into it and realized I'm just not getting to the point. Or I guess sometimes maybe I should figure that out after 20 minutes, but I had a moment of brain fart and decided to start over and speak a little slower and more collected. My name is Carpo. This video is about ego. My ego. What is my ego? What is your ego? I want to make the disclaimer at the beginning of this that I don't want to hear anything about Jungian or Freudian psychology or the id, the ego, or the superego. I'm not saying I don't want to hear it, but rather that's not what I'm discussing here. What I'm trying to do is explain my perspective on ego for in layman terms for the average person, because I'm an average person and a lot of the people I know are average people. I'm not an intellectual as far as and I don't like to consider myself an intellectual. Intellectuals are all about knowing. I'm about knowing things I can use. And as well, a lot of folks might think that when you bring these things up, they'll talk about Jung and Freud and try to explain that there's different forms of ego, which is fine. We can do that. But when you speak to the average person on the street and you say the word ego, see, semantics are wordplay. Semantics are the way that words are interpreted or used, and I think many of the times we get too technical and try to break things down to try to justify and explain what we're, no, I meant this by this word. And it's like, look, if 100, let me give you the perfect example. One guy made and this just came to mind and it's perfect. This guy made a comment one time on a YouTube video a few years back and said something about called someone a nigger, or said something about, used the word nigger, let's put it that way. And I went and I called him out on it, and I said, that's pretty weak sauce. We all have heard the word before. It's not like, it's not like you have to go out here and, prove anything by it or be racist about this particular subject. The guy's response was that I'm not being racist. I'm not racist at all. Look up the word niggardly. And that's what I meant. And he went on and tried to use this semantics to try to justify what he had said. I know that sounds kind of off subject, but that's an extreme case of how people do this. When people say ego, you can mean it a lot of different ways. What we generally have a consensus of what ego is. It's that you. It's who you are. It's your personality. The ego is you, and they're interchangeable. When we're young, we have a strong ego. We want to push ourselves and explain ourselves to everyone, and we know what's right, we know what's best, and nobody else can tell us a damn thing. We get older, we know that we calm down a little bit, we start to take in a little more knowledge, and realize that we don't know as much as we thought we did. And this hopefully brings our ego down to a level, knocks us down a few pegs where we realize that, the old Descartes, the greatest wisdom lies in, or no, that's Confucius, the wisdom that lies in knowing you know nothing. It was Descartes that said, I think, therefore I am. And both of those are great quotes that basically mean the same thing. So, our egos. I went to the other extreme a few years back where I said that, a person needs to remove all their ego. I stopped arguing with people. I started really if a person started calling me names, I would say, oh, well, it's all good, peace, brother, and I tried that for a while to see what it was like. If a person called me on something or said something about me, I wouldn't stand up for myself. I just let it go. And what I learned during that time was a person has to have a certain amount of ego, and you will be tread on in this world if you don't show your feathers, if you don't peacock a little bit. A person can say, I don't care anything about what I look like, because that's egotistical. And I would say to that, well, are animals egotistical? They preen themselves. They want to look good for their mates, and they want to look tough so they don't get beaten down by the other animals. And the same thing with humans. We think that somehow we're superior, we're beyond this, like we've outthought nature to where, no longer do we, we believe that we've conquered our primal minds, but we don't realize that the men still go for the boobies because they miss their mommy, and how women still look for a guy that's like their dad. Many of these subconscious things that we do that we think we're making these decisions, but really they're based on these primal ideas. But we think that our ego is in control of what we do, and it's really not. So when we make a mistake, we tend to shame ourselves, and some people take an extreme dive down to hate themselves and loathe themselves. In fact, their ego gets so ruined, their self-esteem is destroyed, and they become afraid to speak. I've met a lot of people on YouTube who are afraid to comment or say anything, and they said, oh, I've been attacked on YouTube or whatnot. Or people who want to make videos, let's say, that just are scared that they're going to get harassed or hassled. I'll tell you, I've had some pretty hardcore trolls. I've been called every name in the book. People have thrown all kinds of stupid shit at me, called me, a molester, a murderer, a rapist. Anything that a person can project onto someone, they will do it. So, if you want to learn how to control your ego, the first thing you have to do is know yourself. And that's a lot more difficult than, of course, people may think at first. You think you know yourself. And when you start to look at yourself from the outside, such as I'm doing like right now, just by saying that, I'm always trying to be aware of what I'm doing and what I'm saying, and not just being an automaton, just and by doing that, I can pick out and observe little things that I do when I'm being egotistical, and then kind of snicker and laugh at myself, or where I'm not standing up enough and I'm losing out because of it. Ego always comes into play. If a person goes to get a job, they go to a job interview, they're going to dress nice for that. It's not ego, but it is ego. It's them wanting to show that they're not a slob, but it's more than that. They want to get the job, So this is how humankind in our society has become complicated, because sometimes we can't distinguish why we do things, whether we are doing things for ourselves or to look good, or just because society demands it of us. And that damn programming, the way that we're set up from the time that we're born, everything that we do is based on some prior program that tells us how to deal with that. And that's another thing that can't be abolished. You can't separate the program from the ego. And the program's never going to go away. The program is what we've created. There's no secret society that's created the system that we have. There's no, there's no grand designer or a plan, God's plan. It's just the way it is. It's what we've created as a species, and it's our collective, Speaking of ego, it kind of brings up this other thought I had about a really good point about Donald Trump and the whole election that's going on right now. People say, well, we shouldn't have. When you look at the candidates and you look at the situation going on, instead of pointing fingers at the candidates themselves or the issues that they represent, point your finger back at yourself and at the people around you and say, why are we so angry? Why are we so upset? What makes people willing to flock to someone who's such a douchebag, who obviously is very egotistical himself? Because Trump is one of the most egotistical people I've ever seen. In fact, I made a joke about, Trump, Kanye West, 2016, because they're spit and image of each other. They both have fooled themselves into thinking that they are the only ones that are capable, Trump thinks that he's the only one that can fix our country. Kanye thinks he's the best artist in the world, and both of these guys are completely delusional. And, what happens and what comes with extreme ego is an air about you to where people who are suckers will flock to that type of ego because it exudes strength. It seems to exude strength, but really deep down underneath, it's a weakness of character. And that's something that's really hard to point out to people when you say that about Trump. They'll say, well, what are you saying, I'm weak-minded? No, I know what I want, and there are several other reasons people vote for Trump. They want to shake up the establishment, they're sick of the way things have always been. But when you look at it from a simple perspective of ego, it can tell you a lot about a person and why they are the way they are. It can tell you a lot about not just who they are, but what are their intentions. do they mean well or do they mean ill? Because honestly, when a person has a really low self-esteem, it's difficult to find them trustworthy in a position of power, because who knows if they'll get pushed around, or who knows if they'll push other people around due to their lack of self-knowledge, self-awareness. People who've never looked at themselves and prided themselves on who they are. And it's okay to be proud. You know, they say the pride comes before the fall. But honestly, I dismiss that as nonsense. I'm always proud when I do a good job. I've done a lot of phenomenal carpentry projects in my life, and it's being proud of the projects that, and then getting that ego boost when people say, hey, good job, that says, all right, I want to do more, I want to do better, do something greater. And so I think that that's a really important thing for people. So if you know somebody, you know, who has a low self-esteem, prop them up. If you have kids, one of them, I mean, I don't give advice for parents because it's just silly. There's no books that can cover how to be a parent. Every kid's different and every parent's different. So it's just stupid when people try to tell others how to raise their kids. But, you know, one thing I've found is that raising your kids to trust you and on honesty rather than from fear, so they want to come and share with you rather than forcing them to, it opens up many more doors for them to build more self-esteem. But one thing a lot of parents overlook is when your kid does something wrong, it's easy to find that flaw and point it out and punish them for it. Just like when we see something wrong in the world around us or in our neighborhood, we're always quick to complain about it. But very seldom do we give the same credit when they do something good, or they've just been normal or right, when the kid's just been, in general, a good kid that day. You know, generally parents won't say, oh, you've been a great kid today, you know. I mean, sometimes they do. I don't know how other parents parent, but I've heard a lot of people say that when they were growing up, their parents didn't give them any credit. They didn't give them any go get them, or attaboy. You know, a pat on the back goes a long way. And for me growing up, since my father died when I was a teenager, I don't really remember him, and I don't really remember that part of my life because it's easier to just block it out and move on and start over with my new thoughts, my new ideas, and try to build myself up instead of dwelling on, you know, what could have been or whatnot. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically I didn't have anybody to, any men to feed my ego or whatnot, so I did my best to work harder to try to, I don't know, make my mark. But I still have a low self-esteem in some regards. In some ways I still need to work on things. I still have soft points. We all do. That's what makes us human. You know? If you can't admit your flaws, then you're not human. You just have to realize that we all have shit in our lives. And we deal with it. So, I guess that's long enough. Hope you all have a great day, and don't be afraid of ego. But don't let your ego control you either. You know, there is a fine balance, and it's worked for me so far, but I'm still trying to kind of sort out the details. You know, I don't want to be the overbearing asshole, and I sure as hell don't want to be the passive idiot that sits there and takes it either. So, you know, it's always the middle ground, right?